In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the process of 6-speed manual swapping my B8 A4 Avant. And if you're familiar with this platform at all, you will know that they never put a 6-speed manual behind the B8 Avant for some reason. Their older chassis got it, but the B8, I guess they stayed away from it for some reason. They came standard with a 6-speed automatic Tiptronic with sport mode and manual shift mode. And they're great transmissions, never had any issues, never left stranded, never did a thing to the transmission for the past year and a half since I've owned the vehicle. And it held up great. So the whole purpose of this video is to show what the whole process is, what it's going to take, how to do it, what wires are going to be needed, where those wires need to be run, and then coding to make all the modules communicate properly and the ECU happy. Now, as far as I know, there's only been 2 people that I have found that have done this. Some guy in Michigan, I believe, and then not sure where the other guy was. I found all the information on an AutoDesign forum online, and that's where I got all this information from that I'm going to show you. But yeah, the whole point of the video is to record the process and show that it's possible in case there's other people down the road who want to do the same thing and end up putting a 6-speed in their B8 Avant. So without further ado, the B8 A4 Avant 6-speed manual swap. So as far as suspension, what needs to get taken off is these upper control arms that are attached to the chassis back in there, and then this lower strut bolt right in here needs to get pulled out. And then I believe that's everything for the subframe, and then obviously once it's down we'll take the bolt for the CV axle out. But repeat that on both sides. Suspension will be completely disconnected from the chassis. One thing I forgot to mention is the control arm bolt back in there. So these upper bolts decided to snap off. They are completely seized. So we're going to have to disconnect the control arm from back here and back there instead. Alright, so I got those upper control arm bolts out right there. Now they are a 16 millimeter. You can get 2 16s, you can get on them pretty easy. Grab the pry bar, pry them right out, they came right out. So that's all for the upper control arms. Now we need to move on to the rest of the suspension right here. Alright, so I got the whole suspension system loose, got the control arms loose, and then this strut mount here, and then this control arm mount on both sides. So that's everything that needs to come off of the front to drop the subframe. Now moving on from the suspension, come under here to the exhaust. I already got it loosened from the downpipe up there, and then we have to disconnect this here and that piece back here to get to the drive shaft that's behind it up in there, and drop the drive shaft out from underneath the car. So now with the exhaust dropped, we can access the bolts right there to the drive shaft, the carrier bearing bolts, which are going to be right in there, and then the rear bolts, which I already got those out. So I'm going to zip this drive shaft out of here, and then we'll move on to wiring. So I got the majority of the wiring pulled off on this side. Down the front of the motor, got the high pressure fuel pump disconnected right there, as well as the fuel lines that go to it. And there's a few more wires underneath here going to the alternator, and then underneath here down to the crank sensor and those wires down there. So I'm going to pop this charge pipe off next. connecting down there, and then we should be able to get to that wiring beneath. So I've got most of the wiring disconnected now over here. On this side there is still a T30 right there that goes to the block that needs to come off, and that green one is a knock sensor that goes down behind the coolant pump. Also took off the coolant hose that goes right there for the coolant pump, and then over here also make sure to disconnect the coolant hose connected to the reservoir in here. And so now I need to disconnect this power steering line right here that goes back to the reservoir, but I want to keep all the fluid out of it, so I'm going to grab a container, and then I'm going to have to break this factory seal, factory crimp right there, and pull that line off and disconnect that from the chassis. And then also this line that goes into it right there that elbows down, that needs to come off as well. And then that should be everything from this side of the engine that needs to come off. Now this coolant line can stay in place. That's connected to the water pump down there, and then it goes across over here to the turbo, which is going to stay connected to the block here. And all the wiring for the turbo, the wastegate, and the boost controller down there is unplugged. The wiring harness is just tucked over there. So everything on this side is ready to be lifted up. The O2 sensor in the back there is connected on the other side of the engine there. So once that's disconnected, that'll be free to go. And then just gotta get this line disconnected right here, and the steering rack beneath needs to get disconnected, as well as the AC pump that is beneath the power steering pump right there. We'll go underneath and disconnect it, unplug it. That is the last piece of wiring, I believe, and then we can pull the whole wiring harness out, and that will all be free. Also make sure to disconnect this brake booster right here. It's that connection right there. It just plugs right on there, and that. So the last couple things are going to be these two hoses right here. 3 hoses actually. This one, this smaller one right here, goes back to the coolant reservoir here, and then these 2 down here, this pipe here and this one here, go up through the secondary firewall, removable firewall right here, and then that will all be free to go. And then there's one wire down in here that goes across, that wire right here, and that one goes down to this little sensor or purge valve or whatever that is right there, to the back side of it. So I'm going to have to get a pick down there and get that harness off of there, and then that's the last for the wiring harness. That should all come free when we lift the vehicle up. So there's actually a little tab right there that you can compress those 2 fins and pop that thing off. That is kind of hard to see, it's kind of dark, but that's the purge valve thing there, and that is the harness, and we can now access it and get that plug off right there. I've got these hoses disconnected right there and right there. Now there is a little vacuum line down in here. Let's see, that little guy right there is running across right here, and it goes back to this little purge valve back here. So that needs to get disconnected, and then there's a little wire that goes down here to the automatic transmission that needs to get disconnected as well. Well, I am losing battery juice and it is getting late, so I think I'm gonna call it a night there, and we will hit this thing first thing in the morning and get her all wrapped up. Well, not wrapped up, get the subframe dropped. Alright, let's pick up where we left off. So, getting the subframe out here, grab this light. There are these two bolts right back in here that hold this bar up, and that goes across to the front core support. Same thing on this side, those little bolts up in there, and then we'll take this charge pipe off. AC condenser is already unbolted. I just got to get this belt taken off, and then that will come out of the way when we lift the chassis up. And then coming back here, we have a steering arm. Let's get this focus right. That steering arm right there is connected to the rack and pinion right there. We'll zip those bolts out and that'll disconnect. And then we have two transmission lines right there that need to get disconnected from the radiator up there. And obviously, since we are going 6-speed, we're not going to need these lines anymore. So those are going to get completely taken out. I'll have to figure out something to plug the radiator up there. But we'll figure that all out down the road. Back here, it's all empty, ready to go. And then we actually, one more thing we have to disconnect back here is the bolts up there. We have to take this heat shield off, and that drops the shifter selector lever. Now this wiring harness also has to come out. That goes up over top the fender well, and it comes down here. There's a 14mm bolt right there that needs to come off. And then this wire goes down around to the starter down here. Which if we just get it disconnected from the frame right here, and then that also goes up top. I'll show you where that wire goes up top. But we can just let that wire hang down here. It'll be out of the way of the subframe. Alright, so this wire harness comes up through the fender well, and it goes back here past the removable firewall here, and it goes back to this jumper box back here, and this is just the ground connections here. So it is that 14 right, or a ½ inch right there, and then a little 10 mil, and then a little plug around the back side here, I believe. Now once you have it pulled through the fender there, you can just leave it lay on the ground here just like that. It'll be out of the way, and it'll be attached to the subframe and the starter, so all of that wiring is completely free from the chassis. Alright, so moving to the interior of the vehicle to disconnect this shifter. I got this trim pry bar tool, and I got it started here. So now we can just pop this up out of the way. And now we are going to need to, I believe, take this entire setup out here, which it should just pry off. I think I can get it by just pulling up on this, just like that. That comes up, and then looks like there's some tabs down in here that I'm gonna have to get out. Maybe if I can push it down. So you do have to take this screen out here, and then this lever should be either in reverse or neutral to make it easier, but since I already disconnected the battery, I'm just going to take this little pinch clip off of there, and since we're going 6-speed, we won't need this old assembly. So I'm just going to take this crimp connector off and then slide this whole assembly off, and that way this thing can come right off because it doesn't want to move with the shifter being all the way forward. So with that disconnected, we have some more bolts here. They're 8mm or 5/16, and that pulls the ashtray out. And then this wire here plugs in to this shifter selector sensor on the center console unit. And so this we're going to have to pop out of the rest of the housing, so that way the 5-speed manual housing can fit in place. So here we can now see these bolts down there, and up top here, and that will drop that. There's also a sensor right down here that needs to get unplugged, and that also goes to the selector lever sensor. So we're going to unplug that and then get these bolts out, and it should be ready to go. So now with those bolts out, this just fell through, so now that is completely disconnected. And now let's move on to the main subframe bolts and transmission mounts. So before I drop the main subframe right here, there, and then these transmission cross member bolts, I'm going to move back here and take this rear differential out. And so there's a bolt right here underneath, and then there's a little heat shield that needs to come off. Then we can get the CV axle bolts on both sides. And then moving around to the rear, there's two bolts up top there in the rear subframe that need to come out, and then it will drop down a couple inches, and then these bolts here, there's two bolts here and then two more back in there at those holes, and you can reach them through the holes in the subframe back here once those main bolts are out. So I'm going to start by getting the heat shield off, disconnect the CV axles, that main bolt down there, and then we'll go to the rear mains here, and then these last four. So a little tip for getting these rear CV axles out: these are number 8 triple square bolts, and it just wants to spin. So you come over here and put a pry bar in between the rotor and the caliper mount. It will lock it in place and hold it, so that way you can break the bolts out. Did it on the other side, got all those loose. Now I'm just going to repeat the process and get that done. So with this cage unbolted here, I'll call it a cage, you can just wiggle this out of the way, and that comes right out. And now we'll have to move these CV axles over, and the whole pumpkin should just pull right out. So if you move these drive shafts, CV axles, out of the way just enough, you can squeeze this thing out of here. And there she is. Pretty solid unit, no leaks, everything looks good. Quick comparison between the two units here. There's actually quite a bit of a difference. Looking at the back, this one here on the left is the automatic, and this one here on the right is the 6-speed manual diff. It looks bigger, it's definitely heavier than the automatic, but they are pretty much same size. Just a little bit different design on the back housing here. Interesting. So moving on to the subframe, we have two 18 mils here in the back, two 18 mils on this side, and then over here we're going to have two more subframe bolts on each side. They are also 18 mil, and then the transmission cross member bolts there and there, and the subframe will be ready to drop. Alright, subframe is loose. Now I just grabbed the rims off of this thing and lined it up to hit the subframe and the transmission cross member. Now I'm just going to lower the car down to the point where it almost touches, and then I'll yank the bolts out, and then the subframe will be sitting on the rims, and we can lift the chassis straight in the air. So we got the subframe staying down there, and everything's coming up fairly easy. Just make sure you get that AC pump out of the way, and that'll come up with the chassis. All this wiring back here and hoses are disconnected. Everything's free from around the engine. So let's set this thing up and get the chassis out of this thing. there it is. All said and done. Quite a lot of stuff. Got this downpipe from ECS Tuning. Pretty good unit, high flow cat. Way better than the factory downpipe. Now we can get around everything. So I got the engine and transmission set up off of the main subframe, and I'm thinking I'm just going to leave this together because I forgot to disconnect the torque converter bolts, and I think we're going to end up going with this engine down here that originally came out of the parts car. Still good, I think. It's got lower miles than what this block does, so I'm going to check out that one and see if it's possible to just rebuild that one instead, leave this connected, set it to the side, and that will speed up our process tremendously. Alright, now with the drivetrain out of the vehicle, I'm going to move to the interior, and we have to pull the steering rack or steering column out of the vehicle in order to get access to the bolts for the pedal box, and we'll get the automatic pedal box out of it and then start moving towards some wiring and figuring out how much wire length I'm going to need, and I'll go over all of the sensors, the clutch sensor and the range, transmission range position sensor, and then the rest of the wiring that's needed to communicate between the two. So I've got the steering column out of here. Now down here, that little white plastic piece holds on to the brake drum right there, and so this little tool right here is what's used to stick behind the brake pedal there at that white plastic piece and pop the brake pedal loose from the brake drum. So I've got the brake pedal disconnected and all the bolts disconnected for the pedal box underneath, and next we're going to have to remove this firewall here. We got a 10 mil down here and a 10 mil over here, and then another little 10 mil right there, and then we got some 13 mil or ½ inch right here on either side, and that should be most of the bolts. Also do need to remove these bolts right here. It is a 12 mil and a 10 mil, and then this piece of the firewall will come off, and then the lower piece we can remove after. And then lastly, we got these two coolant hoses that need to come off going into the main firewall, and then this firewall section will come out of place. It's all loose right now. Now, with that firewall out of the way, we're going to move down here to the brake booster, and there's going to be a bolt right here, that little guy, and then a bolt opposite of that up top. And you take those out, and those are going to be the last two bolts holding in the brake pedal assembly, and then we can pull that completely out and get ready to put in this new unit for the 6-speed manual. So I got the old pedal assembly box out, and that is right there, and the new one exactly identical, just with a clutch pedal. So we're going to get this thing slapped in the car and try to get it bolted down and get this clutch master cylinder mounted in there, and we'll start wiring it up maybe. So I've got this clutch line fully routed in here, and it was a little bit tricky because I had to take the brake drum off, and so I had to take these lines off in there and pull the whole brake drum out of there, and then you can route this line, which is the only clutch line, and it goes right from there down to the firewall down there. Alright, let's go over some wiring now. So I wrote some of these sensors down. These are the only plugs that we are going to be, most of the plugs that we're going to be messing with, the most important. And these two are the only two that we actually took from the 6-speed manual harness. This is our T6G, and that is at the clutch switch. The clutch switch, that's a master cylinder. It's that guy right there. And so we're going to be wiring that in. And then the next one is the F208. And this is the range recognition switch. That is the other one we robbed off the transmission. That is the only plug that goes to the 6-speed transmission that we need to wire in. And then the next one is the T17Q, and that is the 17-pin red connector in the ECU plenum. Now that one has a engine harness side and a body harness side. This right here is the engine harness side because it is attached to the rest of the ECU and engine harness. And then this one right in here is the body harness side of the same connector. And this one we are going to be using, there's 4 pins on here that are going to come out of the body harness, and then 4 pins on the engine harness. And this runs down and communicates to the next sensor, which is the T30, or next connector, which is the T32B. It's a 32-pin connector at the J519 module, which is underneath the dash. And we're going to be running 2 wires to this T32B through the T17, and I believe that's going to be for the range recognition switch that we're going to run to communicate to this guy from here. And then from the engine harness side, it's going to need to go to the ECU terminal 45, and I will put the rest of. So I'm going to try to explain this in the easiest way possible. This is how I understand it. This is the proper way to do it. We're going to start with T6G1. This is the clutch switch plug. This goes into the clutch master cylinder switch. And we're going to start with the first one, which is a brown wire T6G1, and that is this wire right here. I have them all labeled out. This is just going to go to ground. Any ground connection. I believe this was run, you can run this directly to this ground post in the engine bay. Doesn't matter. Or you could tie it into any other ground. That's where I'm going to tie it into, so that's easy. So now we're going to move on to T6G2, which is the green-gray wire, and that's going to go to pin 43 at the ECU via T17Q9 body harness side. And that is this wire here, labeled out. Now it wants us to run this green wire to terminal, it has to communicate to terminal 43 via T17Q9. Now I have the wire off of the parts car and ECU harness that went from the body harness side of T17Q9 to the ECU. So I have to depin T17Q9 engine harness side and put the wire that goes from there to the ECU, and then this green-gray wire is going to go to terminal 9 in the T17 connector body harness side. So it wants us to run this green wire to this T17 connector. This is the body harness side because it goes into the body there. And 9 on here is going to have to get depinned so we can run our T6G2 to terminal 9 on here. Now 9 is going to tie into terminal 12. 12 is going to get removed, and T6G3, which is our next one, is a blue-gray wire, and that has to go to pin 20 at the ECU and T32D at the CCM via T17Q12.
body harness side. Now, there is the wire that we remove from T6, or the wire we removed from 9 here on the T17Q plug is going to tie into this blue-gray wire. Now this blue-gray wire I just cut because I'm going to depin it from the body harness side and tie this into that one and plug that in. And 9 on this T17 connector communicates already to the T32D. So if we tie in 9 that was removed from here to this blue-gray wire, it's going to communicate to our CCM at T32D28. And we're going to plug those in to 12 on this side, if that makes any sense. And then 9 from the engine harness side needs to get moved to 12 to communicate to pin 20 at the ECU. So right here we'll find pin 9, and that gets moved to pin 12 on here as well. 12 needs to get depinned on this side and on this side. So moving on to T6G4, and this is going to be I didn't write which wire down. It's this black and red wire right here, T6G4. This goes to the 5 amp fuse, position 10, ST1 fuse panel C, fuse slot fed from J329 terminal power 15 supply, or 15 terminal 15 power supply relay. Will have power at this fuse currently because it powers the shift lock solenoids and the selector lever sensor system control module in the auto car. We'll need to cut and splice into this wire to feed T6G4. So gonna have power at this fuse, and that's fine, we can leave the power, but the other side, the non-power of the fuse, it is going to the selector lever sensor system control module. That needs to get cut, and then you can tie in T6G4 to the wire that was controlling the selector lever sensors, and that will give you the fuse for T6G4. Now, T6G5 is the violet gray wire, which is right here, and this wire goes to the parking brake module at pin 25 on the module. Now there's no pin in this car right now that feeds to that spot, and I took the wire out of pin 25 from the parts car and traced it all the way through the wire loom. So all I have to do is connect that in the back, run the wire through, and crimp it together here, and now that is going to be communicating to the parking brake module. So let's get these wires out of the way. Next we should have 2 wires left. T6G6, one wire left actually. T6G6 is going to be this black and red wire right here, and now I have another red wire that I pulled out of the parts car that went to the power side of the fuse. This fuse does not have, it's completely empty. It goes to, it's a 5 amp fuse, fuse position 2, ST2 fuse panel C. Fuse slot is empty on auto cars, and the power side needs to be fed from the T17E17, which feeds the brake light switch. Now T17E17 is in the footwell of the car, behind the A-pillar, just underneath the hood latch. There's a number of plugs there, and you will see a red pin exact same style connector as this, and there's the 17th pin on that plug, which is right by the hood latch release lever on the interior of the car. That feeds the brake light switch. So we can tap into that wire to supply the power, which is the use of this red wire here that I stole. I'm going to plug this side. It already has the fuse side in it, so I'll plug that into the power side of the fuse, run this wire to the brake light switch at T17E17, and then this black and red wire gets plugged into the other side of the fuse, and that runs to T6G6. So that is all of the wiring for the clutch sensor, and I'll go through, and as I'm wiring each of the wires, I'll show what I'm doing and explain the process so it makes a little bit more sense. But let's move on to the F208, which is going to be the range recognition switch on the transmission. Alright, so here we have our F208, or the range recognition sensor, and this one is much easier. There's 3 wires to it. You have a ground, which is I think pin 2 or whatever. That goes to any ground connection in the car, and then you have your blue-red, which this goes to T17Q10 engine harness side, and I believe that's engine harness side. Yeah, engine harness side. This has to go engine harness, which we come back over. It's this plug right here. So we'll find number 10 and we'll plug that into this side of it, and then the next one is this blue-gray wire, and this is pin 3, I believe, on the recognition switch, and this goes to T17Q11 engine harness side again. So you're gonna have 10 and 11, they'll be right next to each other, and then on the body harness side we'll find 10 and 11, and these go to selector lever sensors. So we can completely depin 10 and 11 over here, and then depin 10 and 11 here. Now this side of T17Q goes, we're going to use these wires over here, and these 2 wires communicate from body harness side of T17Q, and this is going to run down to your T32B that we talked about in the beginning. Now there's only 2 of them that go there. It's just these 2. And I believe I'll have to look up what pin it is. There's 2 pins on that T32B connector, and I will point those out. Okay, so I have this forum pulled up here. And so T17Q11, that is the gray-white wire from pin 1 on transmission range recognition switch to terminal 13 at the T32B at the vehicle electric system control module. And then down here we have our 10, T17Q10, blue-red, from pin 3 at F208 to T32B21, pin 21 on the T32B connector. And so that's what these 2 wires, wherever they got to, back here, that is what these 2 wires are for. They are going to go from, let me zoom out, and that is what these 2 wires here are for. It is going to go from the body harness side of T17, 11 and 10, and you're going to follow those down to the T32B connection, and I'll show you where that goes in the interior harness. So that was just a quick overview of what the wires do and where they go, and it may seem like a lot of wiring or overwhelming, but it's really only 2 wires or 2 plugs, and we just have to get those wires to communicate to the ECU and everything else, transmission, make sure everything is happy. And now I'm going to go into a more in-depth process of actually wiring up each of the wires for each plug and what they do and exactly where they go, so it makes a little bit more sense so you can see what I'm talking about instead of just me talking about it. So one thing I should add is fuses SB1 and SB12 can be found right here in this ECU plenum fuse box, and they power the TCM. So since we're going 6-speed, we no longer need a TCM, so I unplug that one there and that one there, and that completely takes out all the power to the TCM. So I've got this wiring kind of laid out here. I've got the plug plugged in, and I got my ground, which is going, I just ran it out here out of the way. That's going to go to this connection here. These two are the T6G2 and T6G3. Now if you remember, T6G2 is going to get fed right here to this plug, and that's going to go to 9. 9 gets depinned, 12 gets depinned, 9 gets tied in to this one, which gets plugged in to 12 right there. And this one, T6G2, goes to where 9 was, and then we have the wire that goes from 9 on this side and goes to terminal 43 in the ECU here. Now I have the violet gray parking brake module wire run down in this little ECU hole, connects to the cab, as well as T6G6 and T6G4, which are the fuses, the wires for the fuses. So those get fed down there. These two get tied in here, and this ground goes here, and that is going to be pretty much all of the wiring for this clutch switch. So I've got my clutch switch wiring harness all fed in, and I fed it into this loom, and I just cut a little hole here at the bottom because it's extremely hard to get anything through there. This is filled with like some sort of silicone goop, so it's hard to get the wires through, but this is what it should look like all said and done. It should come right up to the bottom here. These come through. This sits in the ECU plenum somewhere back there. We can tuck this wire out of the way, and then this wire goes to our ground connection, and then these two get wired into that red connector, and the rest of these 3 get sent down into that ECU hole. So I've got my transmission range recognition switch right here, and I've got these 2 wires fed directly up to this T17Q red 17-pin connector. This is the engine harness side. This runs down to there. I have enough length, I'm pretty sure. I tucked this wire up through this loom, across there, into there, and then just across and directly to that connector. Now, these 2 that are coming off of the T17 are the gear selector lever sensors. These 2 guys right here, and those can stay unpinned. We can cap these off and just tape them back, leave them there. They're depinned from here. Now all I have left to do with this side is plug these wires into the back of here, make sure they go in the right spots, and then on this side I will depin 10 and 11 and run these wires to the J519 module underneath the dash. Now, number 9, the pin 9 in this 17-pin connector needs to get moved from its position at 9 over to 12. Now we already unpinned 10, 11, and 12 here, so 12 is free on this slot. I just depinned 9, that needs to get moved to 12. So I just moved pin 9 over to pin 12, and that pin on the engine harness side goes to the ECU to terminal 20. Now this next one to go in place of 9 since we just took 9 out of there and moved it to 12, we have to run this wire right here, and this will go from this side at 9 to pin 43 in this ECU here. Now there's going to be a pin in 43 that needs to get taken out, and this pin needs to go to the ECU at 43, and that feeds back to 9 here, and that's where we're going to feed T6G2 right here. This is going to go to 9 on this side, body harness side of T17, and then this is going to get this green wire to go from ECU to T17-9. Okay, so let's duplicate what we just did on the engine harness side to the body harness side here. Now I have 10, 11, and 12 disconnected on this side as well. Now coming over here to 9, this is 9 right here. Now since we have this other one D-pin from 9, we're moving this number 9 pin to terminal 12 to pin 12 in this harness, and we also are going to need to cut this wire and splice in our T6G3 wire. Now, like I said in the beginning, this needs to communicate to the CCM, which is going to do that through this blue wire going back this way. So we'll cut this, splice it in, D-pin this, and move it to pin 12, and then pin 9 will be ready for T6G2, and that goes directly in place, which feeds to here, and this goes to terminal 94 at the ECU, or not 94, 43 at the ECU. So I've got this wire here, number 9, connected to the other one that goes to the CCM, and that is now moved to pin 12, and that is what it should look like. Also, just repinned this T6G2 to pin 9, and now pin 9 is also, the original pin 9 is now in 12 and ties into T6G3 right there. Now the last 2 pins on this connector, T17Q10 and T17Q11, are right here via this wire. This is going to go in the back of there and then down into that ECU plenum, and then it's going to go to the J519 module, and that will be the end of all the wiring that we need to do as far as this plug in the engine bay is concerned. Okay, so that's all the wiring here for this plug. I got the 2 wires that go to the J519 module run down there, and they are going through that ECU hole into the cab. So let's move down there next, and we got 3 wires down there. 2 wires go to a fuse, 2 fuses, 1 wire goes all the way back to the parking brake module, and then the other 2 wires going down there go to the J519 module. So let's move down there and start getting all those wires tied up. So right here in the underneath of the dash is the J519 module, and this plug right here is what we're looking for. Okay, and we're gonna unclip this from the J519 module, and there's a little harness here, or a harness housing that comes off, and then you can access the pins. We're going to D-pin 14 and 21, I believe, on that 519 module, and that is where these 2 wires that we just fed through right here through the dash, these are going to 10 and 11 at the T17 connector, and that's going to go up here and connect into this J519 module, that plug right there with the pink harness. So this is the plug at the J519 module, and there is a little clip right here on the side, the right hand side. You just pry that up and this whole black connector will slide away from the pins on the inside, and then you can actually depin them from there. Now the face of this plug here is numbered, and so that's where you find the pin locations, find the number on here and compare it to the plug itself here, and the pins are right here on the side. You can just use a pick and it will pop the pin right out of place. So pin 21 right here does not have a pin in it on the auto cars, so this can just clip right into place. It's the 5th pin on the bottom from the back here. And the same applies here for pin 13 right here. There's no pin in it, so it just slides right in, and that is the 3rd one from the left on the top side here. So moving on to the 2 fuses that we need to tie into. This one right here is this ST1 fuse panel C, fuse position 10. And this is going to be for the T6G4, which is going to run to fuse position 10, which is right here. And we're going to have to pop the back housing off of here. There's just some clips, and then we will find the, let's see, power side and the other side, and we're going to leave the power for this one on fuse 5, and then we're just going to cut the wire that is going to the other side that powers the selector lever sensors, and we are just going to run T6G4 to that spot there. So I just depinned this pin that went into fuse 10 of the ST1 fuse panel C. This one here, pulled the fuse out, depinned it, and I put another pin in it I pulled out of the parts car, and now I'm going to connect this wire to T6G4, which should be this one here, the last wire minus the parking brake module wire. And we're just going to snip this at a good length, find a length for this one, snip that, crimp it together, and then all the fuses will be done. I got this side set up already. There was no fuse in fuse position 2 here on the ST2 junction box, and so I ran my T6G6 and the power wire that is going to tie in behind this trim here. I believe I have to take this trim off, and we can find the T17 E17 connector that we were talking about earlier, and we're going to splice into the brake switch wire to feed the power to our number 2 fuse here. So I've got the power feed from the fuse for T6G6 running down into here, tying into the T17 E17, which is the brake light switch, and that plugs in right back here. It's right behind the panel right here. You have to take off on the side. And the last wire that is left to run is this parking brake wire right in there. And I'm going to connect that and run that through the vehicle, probably through right here. So back here at the parking brake module, this is your parking brake module here, we have this plug, and it goes into the main harness here, which is this big thing, and this pops out. The smaller plug pops out of the big harness, and this right here is the automatic plug that goes in the automatic harness, and this pin right here, second to last, is pin 25, and that's where you need to run the parking brake module wire. Now I went to the parts vehicle that I have sitting, and I grabbed this blue connector, and it already has the hole inside of it for the parking brake module. So I just swapped all of these wires out and into this plug, and now I have to pin these guys back into the main harness here, and then that can get plugged back into the parking brake module here. And and then that plug can get plugged back into the parking brake module once it's all pinned together. Alright, so I got this parking brake module all mounted back up again. The wire's going right down here. Everything's back in place, so we can put this cover back on. So the final pieces of wiring left is this going to pin 43 at the ECU. Now this is our T6G2 that feeds to the T17, and I mentioned previously that there might be a pin that we need to take out of the ECU. Now there actually is not. The automatic cars did not have a pin right here in this pin slot 43, so you can just slide this pin directly in, and then these two grounds over here I'm going to tie together and then take them to this ground post right in there, and that'll be 100% of the wiring finished, and then I can reroute everything, put the ECU plenum back in, put the ECU in, and then get ready to start building the engine for this car. And we are moving right along. Alright, wiring is complete. I've got my two grounds tied in with the one ground connection down here, and then the ECU plenum's back in place. I've got the removable firewall back in place. So with that, we are going to move on to engine building. I'm going to get this block up on the engine stand and get it ready to go in.